Hello, this is Dave of the Wizard's Keep in Muncie, Indiana. And today I thought I'd continue counting down my top 80 board games of all time. In this video, counting down number 50 to 41. And at number 50 is City of Iron. Now, City of Iron is a kind of pseudo deck building game by Ryan Lockett of Above and Below and Near and Far fame. You can kind of tell his games because of his kind of exquisite art that he is known for. But in City of Iron, well, like I said, it is sort of like a deck building game where you're building your deck, adding different cards to your deck to gain different actions. Each card in the deck is a different action you can take in a kind of a action selection Euro style format. The neat twist of the game, though, is as you play the cards, and you lay them in order into your discard pile, the order of the cards don't change. And when your deck is empty, instead of like in a typical deck building game where you would shuffle your deck and then redraw, this you just take your discard pile, flip it on over, and then you'll draw cards from the exact order that you had discarded them from previously. So part of the strategy of the game is not only playing the actions at different times, but also kind of setting up when actions that you're going to be able to take in the future, because you kind of set your deck as you go. And that is what I like about City of Iron. My number 49th favorite game is kind of a tile-laying city building game, and that is Suburbia. Now, Suburbia is sort of like a tabletop board game version of like the classic game Sim City. You get these kind of hexagonal tiles, and you're laying them on your kind of tableau, building your city, and the different city tiles are going to score victory points based on their relation to other tiles. You have industrial tiles, you have commercial tiles, you have residential tiles. Ultimately, the winner of the game is whoever has the largest population in your city. And also, you're going to have different secret goals that you might be trying to achieve. Like you might be trying to gain the largest wealth, or maybe you want to have the least amount of wealth at the end of the game. And those will give you different victory point bonuses as well. So you got a lot of neat options in Suburbia. I just like how the tiles interact with each other, and those kind of secret goals will makes each game kind of different, because you get to try out different strategies or different objectives each time you play. My number 48th favorite game is another deck building game with a twist, and that is Clank. In Clank, you build your deck to kind of to be able to maneuver around the dungeon, and it's sort of like a deck building game meets a dungeon crawl. So your deck, the cards that you're drawing allow you to move around the dungeon or fight monsters in the dungeon. But ultimately, your goal in Clank is to try to accumulate the most value and treasure. But as you move throughout the dungeon, you're going to be making noise, or your other players are also making noise, which may wake the dragon. And if the dragon wakes up, he's going to come around and try to gobble up everybody before they can leave the dungeon. So you gotta get this kind of press your luck concept as well, because you can go deeper and deeper into the dungeon, and as you do so, you're going to find more and more valuable treasure deeper in the dungeon. But the deeper into the dungeon you go, the further you have to go to get out of the dungeon. So you can kind of play it safer, maybe kind of just dip your toes in, rush in real quick, grab a couple items, and then rush out. Therefore, because if you don't make it out of the dungeon, you don't get any treasure, and you're just out of the game. So you might just dip your toes in, rush in, get a little bit of treasure, and get out, and hoping that's enough to win. Or you might go deeper, get more valuable treasure, and if you're lucky to get out and survive, then you can win the game with a larger amount of treasure. And that's part of like the intensity of the game, is knowing like, oh man, am I going to make it or not? And that is Clank. My number 47th favorite game is kind of a dice worker placement game, and that is Kingsburg. In Kingsburg, what you're going to do each turn is you're going to roll a set number of dice, and then you take those dice and you place them on a worker placement board to generate actions or generate resources like you do in a typical worker placement game. But the neat thing in Kingsburg is the fact that you're rolling these dice. In order to place your dice on certain spots, they have to add up to certain numbers. So you can decide if you want to break up your dice, maybe put like a 6 on one spot and generate an action, or you may take your 6 and your 4 that you rolled and put it on the 10 spot to generate an action. Now that 10 spot usually is going to give you a better action because it's a higher number, but you just use 2 of your dice to do so, and you only have a set number of dice to use each turn. So, and then also you're looking at what other players have, because if one person places on, let's say, that 10 spot, then no one else can place on the 10. So you have to look at the math of what your dice can add up to make sure you can place it on locations, and what your opponents have that they can place on locations. Because at the end of if you ever get to a point where you just can't place a dice, that die is wasted, and therefore wasting an action. And so that's part of the fun of Kingsburg, just kind of trying to anticipate what your opponents are going to do, while at the same time maximize the efficiency of how many actions or how many places you can place on the board. Number 46 is a card drafting 2-player game, and that is Seven Wonders Duel. In Seven Wonders Duel, which is kind of a 2-player simplified version of the more popular Seven Wonders card drafting game, you are alternating between you and an opponent of drafting different cards. Usually the cards are going to be laid in sort of like different configurations, like a pyramid on the board, and you're going to alternate each turn drafting one of those, or taking one of those cards. And what those cards do is they're just kind of like set collection cards. So if you're getting certain sets of different cards, they can get victory points, or sometimes those cards are resource cards, and you use those resources to be able to build different of your 7 wonders, which give you usually bigger victory points or bigger actions. You can also discard cards for money, use those money to buy different buildings as well. But ultimately, there's 3 ways to win Seven Wonders Duel. You can win by military. The military, how that's done is, if you draft different cards that have military symbols on it, there's kind of like a tug of war. This piece kind of starts in the middle of the board, and as you draw these military actions, they're going to move, for however military symbols are on the card, it's going to move the piece closer and closer to your opponent, which will give you victory points at the end of the game for how much military you have at the end of the game. But if you can ever get the piece all the way to the end, no matter who has the most victory points at that point, the game wins and you win automatically militarily. Another thing you can do is if you collect all of the science symbols, you can win by science automatically. But last way to win the game is just by basic victory points, which is if no one wins by military and no one wins by science in the game, and you've drafted all the cards, then you would total up all the victory points, and then whoever has the most victory points wins. So there's a lot of different strategies, different ways you can kind of go. Sometimes you can kind of go into the game with a particular strategy. Sometimes you just have to wait and see how the cards come out and determine a strategy on the fly. Lots of different options in Seven Wonders Duel. My number 45th favorite game is a zombie-themed game, and that is Last Night on Earth. Now, Last Night on Earth's mechanics are pretty simple and straightforward, but this game, what makes it great is all about the theme. It is probably, in my opinion, the best zombie-themed game, board game out there, and mostly because it tackles the theme of typical zombie shows so well. In Last Night on Earth, you basically have a zombie team versus a hero team. And if you're playing 2 players, that means one person plays the zombies and another person plays 4 hero characters. If you play up to 6 players, then 2 people work together as zombies and 4 people play the heroes with 1 hero character each. And in each character are these different archetypes you find in your different zombie shows. You've got like the gruff sheriff, you've got the high school jock, you've got the farmer's daughter and the school nurse or the prom queen. And depending on those characters, they have different abilities. Like the sheriff starts with a shotgun. There is a vagabond. He's better at looting neighboring buildings. The other thing is kind of neat is that you've got these different scenarios which are kind of these classic zombie movie tropes. Like there's this one sort of like a Night of the Living Dead, where there's a farmhouse in the middle of the board, and the heroes win the game if they can survive 15 turns, which kind of represents surviving till morning. And then the zombie players win if they can ever kill 2 of the 4 heroes or ever get 9 zombies in the farmhouse. The zombie player always has a handful of cards that they can just keep playing each turn, where the heroes they have their own deck of cards as well, but they don't draw them normally. They have to go loot buildings to be able to get these cards. And these cards are kind of like different actions that modify your die rolls, or they might be different equipment, like you might find chainsaws or blowtorches or things like that. So in order to loot buildings, you have to kind of send certain players out on like supply runs, so like The Walking Dead or something, where you're searching for these different items to kind of buff up your characters to help them achieve this scenario. And that's what I like about Last Night on Earth. It just captures the theme of zombie movies and zombie shows really well. My number 44th game, back to Euro-style games, is the classic tile laying game Carcassonne. Now, in Carcassonne, it's if you're not familiar with this classic game, you're laying different tiles on the board, and they have to kind of connect, sort of like puzzle pieces. So, like when like part of the tile may have like a cityscape on it, so it has to connect up with other cityscapes. Roads have to connect to roads, and the green fields have to line up with green fields. But whenever you lay a tile on the board, you also have a group of wooden meeples in your supply. And if you like, you can take one of your wooden meeples and place it on that tile. And depending where you place it on the tile, it's going to score points differently. If you place it on a road, whenever the road comes to its completion, you're going to get your meeple back and score 1 point per tile for that road. If you put them in a city spot, when the city's completed, you're going to get 2 points per tile for that city completed. And then you can also place farmers in the field. The farmers can score the most points because they score 3 points for every city that's completed in their field, but you never get the farmers back. So you have to find that balance between quick scores, like things you get off of roads, maybe only get a few points, but you can reuse those meeples, and farmers, which are going to score you a lot of points. But if you have too many farmers out there, then you're not going to have enough meeples to be able to get those other points over the course of the game. And it's a very fast, very simple gateway game. It's easy to teach, and that's what I like about Carcassonne. My number 43rd favorite game is the classic cooperative game Pandemic. Now, Pandemic is probably kind of the premier cooperative game, or at least the cooperative game that got cooperative games on the map. And in Pandemic, everyone is working together to try to cure 4 different diseases that are spreading throughout the world. Each player plays a different scientist. Now, each scientist kind of has their own special ability. Either maybe they can maneuver around the board easier, maybe they need less cards to cure diseases easier, maybe they're really good at setting up different outposts that you can kind of transport different scientists to and fro from the move around the board. But each person has their own kind of tactic or their own ability, but you have to work together as a group to try to cure these different diseases. And if you're able to do so, you win, and if not, well, the world is overrun with Pandemic. My number 42nd favorite game is kind of really two games. Two games kind of take this slot. And right now to represent that, I have Hero Realms, but this really belongs to Star Realms and Hero Realms, because they're both essentially, at least the base versions of each game are essentially the same thing. The only difference is the theme. Star Realms is a sci-fi themed deck building game, and Hero Realms is a fantasy themed deck building game. Now, they have different expansions which modify that quite a bit, which is probably why I would probably put Hero Realms slightly above Star Realms. So Hero Realms is sort of like number 42 on my list, and Star Realms is like 42.5 on my list. But they're probably my favorite 2-player deck building games. And the reason being is a lot of deck building games don't have a lot of interaction. You're each kind of just taking your turns, building your deck. Whoever does it the more efficiently is going to win the game. Star Realms and Hero Realms are both designed by former professional Magic players, and they have a very Magic the Gathering feel to them. As what you're doing on your turn is a lot of your cards either attack or money. You use that money to buy more cards to add to your deck, or they're attack cards that attack your opponent directly. And you start generically, each person starts with 50 life points, and your goal is to reduce your opponent's life points to 0. And if you do so before they reduce yours to 0, you win the game. Now, the expansions add a lot of different twists, and the Hero Realms expansion, for example, adds different characters that you can play. So you could play a wizard character, or a fighter character, or a rogue character. And the neat thing about that is most deck building games, everyone starts with the exact same deck of cards, and then your decisions modify how your deck goes throughout the course of the game. But in the Hero Realms with the character add-on expansions, each person's going to start with a slightly different deck that kind of points them in a different direction. So like the rogue has like some maybe different, more money, so they're going to maybe go that direction, or the fighter's going to have some different weapon cards, so better attack, so they can attack right off the bat. And that's just one of the neat things I like about Hero Realms, is that more interaction and the theme. And my last game on this for this video anyway, at number 41, is another Euro-style dice drafting game, and that is Grand Austria Hotel. The kind of theme of Grand Austria Hotel is each person's running their own hotel, and there's a group of different customers out in the cafe, and those customers, they want to stay in a hotel for the night, but they're also hungry, and they all have different desires, what they want to eat and what beverages they want to drink. So you have to get these different resources of wine and strudels that you're collecting to make sure that you can satisfy these customers' demands. And once you satisfy those customers' demands, then you can put them in your hotel rooms. But they also have different goals of what type of rooms they want to stay at in a hotel. So you have to make sure that you have the available rooms available for those patrons. And how you do all of that is it's a dice drafting game. So at the beginning of your turn, or beginning of a player's turn, you're going to roll a set number of dice, and depending on what those six-sided dice are rolled, they're going to kind of clump up in groups. And so you take all the fives, put those in a group, all the threes, you put those in another group, and then you take turns with the other players picking different actions based on where those dice are located. So where the three action is always going to be the same each turn, but how effective that three action is based on the number of dice there. So you may have a particular action that you want to do, like you're like, I really need to ready some more rooms so I can bring more patrons in, but the action that you need to do that only has one die on it this turn. So maybe you pick a different action. Maybe you're like, well, there's a lot of dice on the action that generates wine and strudel, so I'll do that instead, based on how the dice kind of come up. There's also different things that manipulate the dice, so it's not completely luck-driven. But it was kind of a neat little theme based with a lot of resource management and choices, and that's what I like about Grand Austria Hotel. Well, thank you once again for partaking and watching this video. We're halfway there and counting down my top 80 board games of all time. As always, if you have any questions about any of these games or any games in general, feel free to contact me on Facebook or on YouTube, or stop into the Wizard's Keep. Until then, hope you have a good time playing more games.